Here we go.
We
have the lovely Miss Sarah Eifermann with us today. We at the Firefly Initiative like to bring on amazing guests, and today's conversation is going to be fairly fluent. We want to talk about our new campaign, which is the concepts of those important R's. Volunteering Australia might be a little bit controversial. We think stops a little bit early on their 4 R's, and we want to espouse that there's a lot more things that communities need to do to, 1, maintain their volunteers, 2, to improve their fundraising, and 3, to increase their operational efficiency. Sarah, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey in volunteer and community land, please?
Look, I've been volunteering for years. A lot of us don't realise that we volunteer our time when you help out a friend, when you help out a club or association, or even when you volunteer time for another business. And so I have jumped on and off organisation executives in the last 20, 25 years when I thought it was appropriate for my skills to assist, and when I recognised that that club or organisation needed support. So I'm currently the president of my local Chamber of Commerce, which is in a regional town called Maclean in northern New South Wales, not too far from Yamba. And we're a business district chamber, so we have a little bit of a wider purview than just our little town. But just to give people an understanding, there's 3,000 people that live in our town, but the town itself services over 12,500 people because we have the supermarkets, the petrol station, the hospital, and everything here. So yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, and professionally though, I mean, you talk about volunteering because there's an interesting perspective, Smithy, about our special guests. Some are, org founders. Sarah cuts across a lot of different industries, and we've spent some time in her business strategy type mindset. So volunteering and business alignment, Sarah. Can you comment about
Well, yeah, absolutely. So professionally speaking, I'm on the Women's Commercial Finance Forum Steering Committee. Courtney and I actually met through Startup Bootcamp, where the mentors volunteer their time for the betterment of those business owners and founders and organizations.
Mentors or mentors? Mentors?
Well, you know, the mentors that need mentoring. Yeah, so I've met some amazing people through those journey, and I think that's what keeps me coming back around and circling back is the people. It's the connection that you get from it. You need to be in a position to give your time, and you need to feel like you are being validated or valued, not necessarily rewarded. I know that you guys are on a mission to reward volunteers, and not everybody does it for physical rewards, but at least to feel that your time and energy people have gratitude, and community and organisation has gratitude for giving back, because in a lot of instances, like grassroots wise, things don't exist without volunteers. And it's been forgotten. It's like gone into a time warp where people just expect things to happen, and they don't realize the human factor that's sitting in behind those events or those organizations running and operating and providing. And where I live, big ones are like the Lions clubs and the Rotary Club and what they do for community. And probably, to their own discredit, they don't promote the value that they give back. And we've spent a lot of time with the chamber bringing our local orgs together, because it's like 25, 30 just in my local area. And some of the stuff that Lions specifically are doing for the schools, they're feeding kids at our school, like breakfast, and no one knew about it. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah, positioning, right? Like positioning is so important, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And so in this last month, we've changed our newsletter a little bit, Sarah, to try and keep it refocused for our readers and our amazing volunteers and communities, to try and sort of harmonise on some key topics. And we're going to rotate those through and then create this little, what we're calling a little ebook that sort of summarises all that, so you can just download and read at your discretion. The areas where we focused on for this particular series in the last month was reigniting your passion. So that concept of how do we keep the passion there? Because you've rightly said that we don't realise the importance, number one, of volunteers and what they provide, but also that if you're in the seat for too long, it can become a little bit stale, and that's a high risk for any organisation.
It can be a heavy burden to carry, right? And often it ends up being one or two people.
Yeah, but you don't do the work either. You know what I mean? Like that's the other bit. You stop doing the work that you were passionate about doing previously, so that impacts. We're going to talk a little bit about recognizing contributions and trying to understand how we actually do that. We certainly need to talk about efficiency, and you talked about positioning, but I think efficiency is also important in this world that's changing. How do we do things better? I'm part of an association, and we're doing a massive ramp this year on efficiency improvement for the people, so they can actually do the things they're good at. Go and talk to community. Go and have chats. Run events.
Yeah.
Don't get bogged down in shitty admin. Anyway, so how do you keep your community passion alive? What drives you?
Originally, it was the need. There was nobody else that was prepared. Our chamber had I live in an area with an aging population, like the demographics of where I am, most people are over 68. And the newer generations, as we know, coming through, don't volunteer. We don't have time. Like it's a constant, I hear that regularly from people. I don't have time. And yes, in a lot of instances, they don't have time between work and family and sport and kids and commitments. That's true. But there's also a lack of priority. It's not important enough. So for me, I put my hand up because I felt the need to, I know, look at Courtney's face there. I felt the need to give back to a community that I could see was struggling from a business point of view. Like I travel an hour each direction, north and south, and there's really strong business communities, but where I am, there is not one. And that was a real challenge for me when I moved here. And the more I am in this position, the more I recognize that people don't see it as a priority here. And so for me, for what I do, for how I see the world and the strategy side of how I operate, I was like, there's got to be a way to crack this nut. And so I put my hand up, and came in, and perhaps to my own detriment with too much passion, and tried to really lift an area, like a subject matter that has had not a lot of energy invested in it for a few years. Like our chamber was doing a lot of work behind the scenes, but they weren't communicating that with the public. So they were doing work with council, they were lobbying with council, state, and federal governments. They were liaising with police and emergency services, especially during the floods here, but they didn't tell anybody that they were doing it. So the assumption is that they've done nothing, and that's not true. And then people have said, well, why am I paying my fee? I'm not paying my fee anymore because there's no events. I can't see you doing anything. So I came in thinking and hoping that I could bring more of a collegiate feel, because being in business can be really lonely. And like for me, I moved to an area that I didn't know anyone, and I found it really isolating. And there's a lot of people that are moving here and having the same experience. And I had hoped to bring us together. And I've had different successes, shall we say, in achieving that. So our events that are open to general public do really well. We've had a town meeting, and we had a Meet the Candidates event for local council. But our internal business-based events are struggling to get numbers and attendees. So in terms of keeping my passion inspired, for me, I like to see progress. And if I'm not seeing progress, that's a real challenge. I don't feel like what's the point? What's the point? Why do it? I'm normal like that, like everybody else. If there's no validation for it, I get a bit frustrated. So
you start to get on the treadmill really easy, don't you? You seem to be walking for kilometres and kilometres, and you get nowhere. We see in essence too is some of that process relative to the feedback we get from our volunteer organisation, Sarah, is that they seem to that there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of work that aren't making any progress. And you go, one of the things I know, and it's the joy that we've got relative to Smithy's efficiency models, is that it's really easy to see the progress. And I think that's part of the problem. We don't have tools or systems in place that can actually recognise the amount of effort and then see the result of the effort.
But you're dealing with different skill sets and different mindsets as to how they invest and unpack topics and the ways of doing things. And what court might like do isn't necessarily received because it could be a technological leap, it could be a mindset leap as a different way of doing things. And if you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got, right? That old adage is true. But in local, especially I think regional communities, they don't spend that much time investing into new ways of doing things, and also they don't get the support to do that either. So it's like a double-edged sword. And how do you overcome that without looking like you're trying to force substantial change through that nobody's actually invested in?
Yeah, look, it's really, really interesting. We've been talking about how do you invoke change, or how do you invoke motivation? Motivation, probably one of the biggest single things, is to get someone to be motivated to what your cause is or what you're passionate about as well, and that's how you create tribes.
You back at priority, right?
I know. When tribes are in flow, they're very dangerous, and I mean dangerously good, right?
Yeah. So when I came in, because I have a different position, and also with my business acumen and the stuff that I teach as a business strategist and a business advisor, people were like, wow, can't wait. She's fantastic. They got motivated, they got excited, and then they kind of they didn't sustain it. And then you also had the people that then came out saying things, oh, she's too gung-ho, or she's painful, or she only has her way of doing things.
I don't believe you, Sarah. No one would say that.
All inaccurate statements, right? All inaccurate.
Well, like, there's potential, but it's all about perception though, right? Like, to some people that aren't in the same mindset vein, I would appear that way. But if you come and have a conversation with me, like one I heard recently was, oh, she's super controlling. And I'm like, if I had 45 volunteers that were reliable, dependable, we could trust to get the job done, I would have just said, here you go, off you go, and done it. But when one person says they're going to do something and then doesn't do it, and then another person, all they've got are complaints about ideas, one person or a team of small people, the leaders of your organization or your volunteering group, they have to take control to manage where you're going. And we've had a really open public strategy process. We did a strategy day. We invited the public to our business chamber. We then presented that at our town meeting. So it's not like there's any hidden agendas here. We want the best outcomes for our town and our business community. And these are the difficult politics that you get when you are involved in community spirit and volunteering. It's not easy, but then why do you do it?
Yeah, look, it's funny because you mentioned earlier about Firefly building a premise around rewarding volunteerism, and we still believe that there should be some level of reward, and how people want to receive that reward is up to them. We wouldn't ask anyone.
And I personally agree. I think in such a busy time, and when cost of funds are tight, like cost of living has gone up, if you're asking people to give up the time where they could be earning an income to support endeavours in community, then they should be rewarded for it.
And the other bit is the bit that I'm super intrigued by in the psychology of the volunteers on our platform is that we kind of see them lean into two camps. I do it because I love it, and it's really nice to get the reward. And now I'm starting to a bit incentivized by doing valuable things because I can see there's some other things that help me, cost of living and the like. And then we're getting this other group that are really strongly saying, well, I don't do it for me, I do it for my org. And so we've started to build out components in the platform to try and accommodate that around helping them to raise funds, to better position themselves, to tell better stories, to get to use.
Imagine if I had a spare $500 to put on a community event or a business event, and I didn't have to worry about like, how am I going to pay for this as an organization? Like,
correct.
It makes your life easier as the volunteer.
But it's that constant can't give back conversation. It's going out with the tilted hat and saying, in a roundabout way, like whether it's a club, whether it's a life-saving entity, where it doesn't really matter. Their request often is just give me the money, please. And so they don't necessarily get alignment in that engagement. Does that make sense? Like, we've got this small business community who want to give. They really do. I've met so many small business owners. In fact, 27% of them are volunteers anyway. So of course they do, right?
Exactly.
Now the question mark is how do we allow our ability of recognizing contributions to flow deeper and wider into our business communities, and how can philanthropic organisations, volunteer-led organisations tell better stories around what they do? What sort of things would you recommend?
Look, comstrat is really important. So understanding who you are and what you stand for and what is your purpose.
What does comstrat mean for those people that don't know?
Communications. Communications, how you communicate with those internally and those externally.
So communication strategy, comstrat.
Thanks, breaking that down so that you all know what your purpose is and why you're here and how you're going to share that with people around you. And that's probably the first one, but it's really making sure that you're on the money, like pun intended. Why is your organization here? How does it need to operate? Often our volunteer-led organizations, like many business owners, they don't look at their dollars. They don't look at their bottom line. They don't look at their budget. They don't look at therefore what they can do. They have these amazing big vision goals that they want to achieve, but then no funding to get there. So how do we break it down? It's granular, it's boring, it's certainly not sexy, but maybe if we are able to change the mindset around our volunteer executives as to approaching things from a slightly different viewpoint and assisting them with the skills to actually do that, maybe they would have better long-term outcomes. And I see it quite regularly in the businesses that I do advisory work with, and I am starting to see it with some of the local orgs that I have worked with, is that when they change their focus just a little bit, they just tweak where they're looking and how they're approaching, they have better outcomes and better returns. And Firefly is positioned so amazingly to achieve what the organization can't necessarily do on its own by bringing in some of those bigger branded names, by bringing in the brand Firefly to an organization and getting that really grassroots, deep-centered recognition of Firefly. It's got exponential growth and therefore value return to not only volunteering worldwide, Australia-wide, but also in our local communities. And I think, so we have been a big advocate, and you know that that's how we met, was Firefly originally through Startup Bootcamp. But like Daryl's come down and we've invested in trying to assist Firefly get its brand into the community. And the uptake has been, wishy-washy. Some orgs have jumped on and are recording, like we're recording through the chamber, but it's pretty much me because I see the value in it. So like anything, how do you communicate the value? I look at it and say, if we can get $500 in vouchers, I can use them as a prize for a raffle. I can gift them to the Cane Growers Association for one of their events, their 100-year anniversary, and they can use that as prizes. Like it's never ending. It's so powerful, that synergy that can come if we're all in it together. But the value piece, it's difficult to proposition for your organization or for you guys as well, if we're not looking at why volunteering isn't as important now as it used to be culturally.
So we're both at the starting gates here, Sarah. You go, Smithy, jump in.
Oh, look, only that, and I'll let you tell the story because you're the most connected to it, is that we've just launched our volunteer Santa Sack auction launch. And
Christmas volunteers, that's exciting.
And so maybe talk to the aim of that, Daryl, what we're trying to achieve and why digital and why aggregated delivery can be really powerful for organisations that are prepared to, and I'm going to say this, share in the journey, right? Because if we all do this in a democratised, decentralised way, the greater the touch points at the end, the more value we create for the whole. It's the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. You know what I mean? So maybe, Dale, talk a little bit to that because I think we haven't announced that to Sarah, and that's something we'd love to get into the local community.
And just before I do, there's a couple of things that Sarah mentioned just then and earlier. So we talked about some of the, the bastions of volunteering like Rotary and Lions, and we talked comm strategy and how to do that. So in relation to our Christmas for Volunteers, the great Christmas hamper giveaway, we've been actively calling local businesses who are onboarding on almost a 100% ratio, which is fantastic. But there's a lot of them that have said, look, I'm not really interested. We already give to X, Y, and Z. So okay, well, we didn't know that. You've got that comp strategy there where you go, Lions Club is really bad at letting the community know of the good things they're doing. So therefore the community doesn't know.
They do some amazing things, right? Like,
unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. It's just the session that we were at, and we were talking about with Lions down there. I had the luxury to meet their president of that group. But it's something like $250,000 a year that they give back into community just from bottle recycling process.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So they give $80,000 back to community in that, but they generate revenue of 250, which then allows, so it's something like 2 million pieces of recycling has occurred. So you've got the impact to environment for a start, because it's staying out of landfill. You've got ability for youth to learn how to be entrepreneurs, shall we, and start a business by collecting bottles. And my friend said recently, the bottles that are in your car, because I do a lot of Ks, can I have them to give to my friend's son, because he's started collecting bottles to earn them back from the return and earn. And then they've got the actual cash that they give back separate to their programs that they run on top. So it's an amazing amount of money that is coming back to community, and yet they didn't tell anyone until I asked them to present at our town meeting.
And so the opposite to that is, having spoken to small businesses, how do we encourage small businesses to be more comm strategy savvy in relation to announcing what good they're doing? Because there's a lot of small businesses out there that are already committing and supporting organisations. No one ever hears about it.
I suppose you have to unpack the reason why they're doing it, right? So there's also an argument that says that you just do good for the sake of doing good and you don't tell anyone about it, right?
Yeah.
And in the community that I live in, there's definitely a lot of that. And there is a fine line, but if you're consistently supporting local groups, local clubs, local schools, then it should be part of your community sponsorship. This used to be called corporate citizenry and has been morphed into ESG.
ESG.
Social responsibility. But being a good corporate citizen or being a good business owner used to just be part and part of the ethics of being in business in a community. I don't know. Do you teach them the business acumen benefits that go with the value proposition? Because it's not like the business just wins. The school wins, the club wins. The individual that shops at that business then knows that their money gets paid forward. I actually see a lot of value in the circular economy of communication.
It's huge. It's monumental. Like we've done this alignment piece. Sorry for interjecting. With what do small businesses want, and what do small community volunteer orgs want? And when you break it down, we want to recruit volunteers to run our orgs better. We want to recruit customers to maintain our profile and community. We want to retain both of those, because that's really important in loyalty and the like. We want to make sure that they feel that they're rewarded and cared for. Customers are no different. Volunteers are the same. This massive alignment in these areas that are super exciting to me, because the connectivity is so obvious. It's so obvious. Yet we don't do enough when we talk to, like in the CSR example, when a business talks about its gifting, they don't do enough to ask where and why.
Well, you've seen this in the,
just to chuck it in a bank account at the local footy club or whatever it is. There's no value in that. Like it doesn't set for any long-term strategy. It doesn't set for any. Hey, I've actually given money for empowerment for outcomes in my community.
But also, what's the business getting out of it? If you go to a business, and I say this all the time, you go to a business and you ask them for a sponsorship. Where's the return on that investment dollar for them? So every small business fights to earn every dollar it gets, right? You then go and ask them for 500, 750, 2.5K. What is the return that they're getting out of that investment into your local organization? And if you don't have one, it's not sponsorship, it's a donation, and understand the difference.
And please understand the difference out there, people, because we are a strong advocate that you can have both. You can donate.
You can have both, absolutely.
You can actually ask for reciprocation of value And in that scenario, the flywheel is created. Like that sets for longevity. That sets for repeat sponsorships. There's so many things we could go down into.
This is a very long rabbit tunnel, and we're not following. We're not following the rabbit.
We think $2 billion in local sponsorship, which is the lipstick on the pig for $2 billion of donations. And
Easily.
By the way, that's in Australia. And by the way, we'll just put some signs on the fence. We'll put some logos on T-shirts, and we'll leave it at that, shall we?
So, like, to give you an example, though, 15 years ago, at least, about that, I was sponsorship officer for the local football club, in Northern Melbourne Football League, and our sponsorship goal was 120K, because that's what we needed to fund budget, to fund the players that we needed to buy to compete with some of the other teams, and all the things that local clubs do in the Division 1 league. And when I came on board, there was a lot of contra, like, we'll give you service, but they were never valued, or they never were recognized because it wasn't physical cash. And so we changed all of the packages, and we ended up raising $115,000 that year, up from about 55. And because we gave back to the businesses saw value, people recognized their brand, they went in and shopped at those businesses. You created a partnership between yourself and that business, and everyone won. And it's taken for granted sometimes that should just be what happens if you live in especially in regional areas opposed to the cities where you live in a small community. It's expected that you shop at the local butcher and you would support local and you'd shop at the local supermarket, but it doesn't always work that way. And you need to be able to demonstrate value in everything that you do, whether you're the small business making the decision to give cash, or whether you're the club receiving that cash, and what's the value to that business as a result. And sometimes that can just be content for that corporate social responsibility piece. Take photos, tag them in your Facebook.
But it sounds so easy, right? But no one does it. Well,
time, skills.
Which comes back to efficiency, which comes back to have you got the systems in place to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Should, and I'm going to say Claire or Tom, the social media person, leave the seat. What happens? Often it just goes off the cliff, right? I did it last year. I just watched it go off the cliff.
Yeah. So I know Courtney's going to say, well, we can use AI to fill all of this in.
We can use AI to do some
things. But that's a scary proposition for most of the people in the age groups that run our volunteer organizations.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what the statistics are, and it would be very interesting to see what the average age of a volunteer is and what the average age of an executive volunteer organization is.
We had that conversation about the average age of the volunteer in your domain.
Yes.
Versus that. Across the board, nationally, it's 42.
Is it? That's much younger than I would have thought.
Yeah.
And that's nothing to do with Monty Python or the Meaning of Life.
Is that accounting, I suppose, for sporting clubs with young kids, and then the parents are getting involved, and therefore that's bringing the age down potentially?
Look, as a statistician, it's really hard to actually give you an answer to that question, because I find some great difficulty in the established quotable statistics in the marketplace as it is. To the organisations that I've spoken to, Sarah, I would say it's different relative to serviceability. Sporting clubs seems to have a younger.
Yeah, I was going to say here, definitely our sporting clubs have a younger footprint
than your op shops, for example. Like if I looked at op shops nationally, taking into account the Salvos and Vinnies and all of those, I would say that their age volunteer demographic is more aligned to what you're experiencing down there in McLean.
Look, I know even with the chamber, a lot of the comments were made because they were retired people that were running a business chamber. Doesn't really work to have your finger on the pulse in business in the community if you're retired. But the workload to run the chamber needs 20 hours a week to 25 to 30 hours a week. So if you're not retired or financially wealthy, how do you commit to running a business chamber? And then even if you're financially wealthy, you probably don't meet the demographics of the other members of the group then, do you? So
risking that. But having said that, we do know that there's 120,000 people that carry a full-time or part-time job, do two volunteering positions on a committee level. So I call it 20 full-time roles, doing more than 500 hours a year. So these people are the superheroes of our community. These are the people that you want to be around, in my opinion, whether you're a business owner or anyone, because they're the movers and shakers. They know how to move a community, they know how to talk to a community, and they know how to give. So that's kind of that really interesting bit, is that we've got this seminal group of incredible people that unfortunately sometimes don't know the incredible nature of what they're doing and how to leverage that in its own right, just softly.
So if we're looking at efficiencies, I would say if I didn't know what I knew and I came onto an executive, I would be looking for ways to make less work. How do we make things smarter without us having to physically invest the hours and the time into doing that? And whether that's with programs, whether that's with apps, like even with our chamber, we're just rebuilding the website. It hadn't been done for years, but the form to become a member, everything was manual. So even changing to an online form, we have a requirement in our constitution to have the committee vote to make sure that it's
constitutions. Jeez Louise.
Well, no, it was changed to make sure that. Look,
that's got to go under reigniting your passion, right?
Look, I understand why it was added to ours, because there have been some instances up and down the coast in smaller regional areas where you have people come in from outside the area with their own agenda, and they take over the local groups and they use that to lobby local, state and federal government with an agenda. And so ours was added that we needed to have 2 members agree at a committee meeting. So we immediately changed that to, let's all work on teams. Why do we need to meet once a month for 3 hours? We can make, and why does a member have to wait a month to have their membership approved? If we need 2 people to vote, then we'll put it into teams and we'll run like a quasi committee meeting.
I absolutely love that. I mean, the funny thing was, I've seen some really interesting stuff. I'm not heavily into US politics, but I'm watching a little bit this time, so I think it's going to have a bearing on the world in the next 4 years, right? So I'm very curious about what that looks like. Anyway, the one thing that is happening over there is this concept of the regulatory state, which is just a constant addition to existing regulations, which means you get to a stasis of so much stagnancy you can't move. Everything is regulated. So the same can happen, I think, and it has happened over many generations of not-for-profit sector, is that they've just continued to add to, they haven't refined, if that makes sense. They've added something nice to refine. So refinement just in a constitution alone, geez, I mean, there's an opportunity for some lawyers out there to show goodwill. Like, I'm not joking, right? Coming up, or someone in the small business community.
There's a trust issue there, right? Like, so you've got to have the locals in your community be prepared to volunteer their hours to believe in efficiency, value, metrics, and outcomes. And I don't know if we have that yet.
It's an interesting point, though, because when you look at and we look at rewards and redemptions, and our platform is built on that as well. And you go to like Smithy just said, and I've dealt with Pro Bono Australia, who have 1,200 lawyers that are all doing fantastic stuff in niche marketplaces relative to domestic violence and other issues. However, you get a law firm that says, we'll put some reward vouchers into the system. Our volunteer consciousness instantly goes, I don't need a lawyer. But when you think about efficiencies, like you go, our lawyer will be happy to do that. And our legal partners here on the Gold Coast, just a quick shout out to CJM Law, who have said, we will do constitutional reviews and efficiency policies in relation to
Good to know. Good to know, but like I didn't know that. So if
you think about the real dynamic of the efficiency of that, like Courtney said, we go, let's throw 75% of the stuff that was legislated in our organisation in 1928 out the door because it doesn't work anymore. Again, that's one of those things. So it's about
interesting story, and I am conscious of time, but our local bowling club was due to renew its rules because, well, the rules are written in gendered language for a start, because they were last redone in like 1980s. And no, 1992 they were last redone. They tried to update them 10 years ago, but they needed 3/4 of their members to vote. This is a not-for-profit local organisation. It's a local club to vote, but they didn't communicate why changing and updating their rules was important, and it got voted down, which leaves them open to being litigated against for discrimination, because their rules are outdated within the Act. And it was really interesting. I went to a local meeting to talk about this. They had opened it to the public and they had a lawyer come in, and I ended up asking quite a few general questions just to try and get them to share the knowledge they needed to share so that people could actually see the value and the benefit of updating the rules. And it wasn't just procedure. It really is a requirement to protect our club for where we're at in society.
It's huge. We've had lease issues with councils, 42 tennis clubs or 19 of the 42 just being pushed, no consultation, new leases. Like absolute killer. 8 times cost in some of these. Like 8 times the cost without consultation. Like it's just break communities, literally break them overnight.
So how do we build the knowledge piece of the volunteers that are sitting on our executives? And Firefly is probably if you look for a central organization, one like you is probably the best one to go forward. One, because you create value. You create value and you provide trust. And trust is the biggest issue, because if you're in an inferior perceived position on executive lacking knowledge, you will feel vulnerable. And then if an organization comes in and offers their support, can you trust them? But if they're recommended by Firefly and vetted by Firefly as a I don't know, I'm just spitballing here.
No. It's funny because we've got a horizon and that's not in our current horizon, but our ultimate goal, and we'll finish on this because I'm conscious of time. Our ultimate goal at Firefly is to create an environment where we've got a deep and rich network of organisations with knowledge and capability that can share that knowledge and capability in an environment that's conducive to building the trust that you talked about, because you've been there, you've done that, and you have absolute care for the outcomes. Now, that won't take a minute, that won't take a week, that won't take a month, that may take 3 or 4 years, might take 10 years, but our vision is to that effect, because there are so many inefficient organisations out there, Sarah, that with a little bit of change could make a big difference.
Well, I was just going to say, like, if there's one thing for those that are listening today as a takeaway, ask for help from Firefly and their surrounding networks to get support for your organisation, because if you get the right metrics in place for efficiencies, for compliance, for everything else, all it will mean is better outcomes for your organisation. You'll get more money when you fundraise. You'll get better outcomes for your kids or for whoever you support. So come to Firefly and start asking them, because you guys have got the connections. You've been building this network now for years. And maybe you haven't gone to market yet either, letting people know that you can be trusted, but you've been building trust in a slower way, which often is how it needs to be. But if you're listening today, come and ask Daryl and Courtney for some assistance and see what they can do for you. Like, what have you got to lose?
I love it. I reckon that might be.
And to all our volunteers, that's an unpaid announcement. Sarah on the fly. So it's
you can pay me later. No,
it's sensational. It's sensational advocacy, and it's great that you get the opportunity to let the organisations and the small businesses that we're trying to collaborate with.
I've been on the journey with you guys now for probably 3 years. I think it's been nearly 3 years, and what I think you've got and what you offer, there's nothing like it in Australia, let alone the world. And so the earlier adopters of Team Firefly will have better longer term outcomes than those that wait until it's a big branded name to get on board.
Undoubtedly, and the fact that we've just upgraded the system, and we should have a launch in 2 weeks of the ability for what we're calling community tokens to be created by the virtue of those around. That's for us next level stuff. So we're looking forward to it. On that note, Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure. I knew it would go over. It has, and that's okay, because we got the best snippet at the end, and that will get on the reels for later. Thank you so much for attending today. Great conversation.
Thanks for having me. See you later.
Thanks, guys. And we look forward to having another chat with some other massively impactful and amazing people next month. Sarah, again, thanks. Smithy.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Bye.